Welcome to the JAMODI podcast. We are all surrounded by amazing coaches and leaders. So let's get an inside look at not just what they do, but how they do what they do. After all, becoming the best versions of ourselves is JAMODI, just a matter of doing it.
Are you ready to level up your team skill development? Well, Bology is here to support you in driving accountability and skill development. The Bology app is more than just tracking. It's a resource for enhancing skills, knowledge, and mindset across your program. Join coaches all across the country using Bology to simplify training and empower your athletes. Let's build consistency, accountability, and skill development together.
You've been able to be around so many different coaches over your career, and you still are, and players too. What are some characteristics of great leaders that you've seen that they have in common?
Well, so, again, I think when it comes to great coaches, I would say the first thing is they have to know their stuff. Because if you don't know the tactical and technical pieces and how to get players better and keep up with the time and those things, you're not going to be able to work. And I worked for Drew at Pure Sweat. It was like, you have to be good enough where if LeBron James walks into this gym, you have full confidence that you're going to be able to take him through a workout and he's going to get something out of that. And if you don't feel that way, then you don't know your craft well. And so I 100% feel that way. I 100% feel like I could bring any player in the world and show them film and show them things that they need to, do a little bit better, or put them in situations where they can problem solve in those situations. Because I'm not a big believer in the alone stuff. I'm more of like putting them in some problem solving situations. But I think that's the number one thing, is you have to be able to teach at a deep level, or be able to put them in situations where they can find, problem solve and find solutions. The second part, and again, I don't know if one's more important than the other.
Sure.
I think they're all three very important, but you have to be able to build relationships. You have to be able to build trust. If players don't trust you in all aspects, not just on the floor of getting it better, but off the floor and taking care of their needs, again, being a transformational coach instead of a transactional. If they can't trust you, if you can't build relationships and learn about them and understand that you're coaching people, you're not coaching just a basketball player that you're just trying to use up to win games. Again, I think you're missing, a big piece. And then the last part is like, can you communicate? And it's not my job. I don't think it's any coach's job to necessarily motivate, but you have to have an it factor of being motivational. You have to be able to have, to like in school, for instance, you have these motivational speakers come in, and you're going to, in the first 5 minutes, if this is going to be something you're going to want to pay attention to and take notes on, or if you're going to be like, oh, gosh, this is going to be bad. It's just that it factor of being able to communicate effectively. It's having energy. It's being motivational, understanding that getting better is going to be an intrinsic motivation anyway, but you have to still be able to set the agenda and be motivational in that sense. And so I think those are the three most important things. And when it comes to the technical, tactical, and learning stuff, I think coaches have to be open-minded, because if you're still doing stuff that they did in the 1980s and the game's evolved, and we know that the block practice is not the best thing for kids to get better, you're not keeping up with the times. Are you studying the best way players develop today's world? Because it's totally different, right? Like in our day, we would go to basketball camps, right? You would go to the University of Baylor team camp, or to learn. You would go there to learn, fundamental drills or things you could do to get better or play against better competition. But in today's world, these kids have a computer in their hand, a phone. They can watch and learn. I mean, these kids will call me. I've got a kid that was a senior last year. He would call me and be, I already watched 3 games this morning. And I'm like, thinking back when I was a young player, it's like, dude, I would have to wait all night before I could get to watch Michael Jordan play with the Chicago Bulls at 7:00. And kids can watch 3 games before they eat breakfast. And so it's a different world as far as the learning goes. What they don't get as much of today is just the freedom to play basketball where they're not getting coached and told that's not the right way to do it, and that's not fundamental, and that's not this and that. And so I think opening up avenues for players to just have free play and be able to fail and learn and just be with the brand, social aspect, all that. You got to build environments where kids can have more free play.
Man, two things right there is I think we got to make sure we leave the fun into training with our players. I think so many times coaches, sometimes parents can maybe suck the fun out of the game. So keeping the fun in it while we're being purposeful and intentional with what we're doing. And then you nailed it. Put them in situations where we let the game teach the game. Like the game will show a player why a single gap is bad. It's going to show them that. So instead of before they go through it, stopping them and helicopter parenting it and pulling them out of that, man, let them fail through that. And then through the question method, and not in a way that puts them down, but uplifts them and helps them to think through that process. I think we got to put them in those situations all the time.
Yeah. And that's what the games-based approach is, right? Just instead of making it a drill, let's make it a game. But then again, we can take it a step further by observing, right? Instead of just telling them what they have to do, or just set up a game and then observe what happens and then say, okay, how can I tweak? How can I manipulate? How can I change constraints? And then make it where, and that takes a lot of practice. That's not something a coach can just do. I'm so fortunate because at Fayetteville High School, they've hired me to do a lot of skill work on the court, conditioning things. And these coaches Coach Rimmer and Coach Stamps have played for state championships, won multiple state championships. And they're saying, hey, is there a better way? Is there a way you could come in and take this segment of practice and do small-sided games? And when coaches have open minds like that and start to look in how players are different today than they were 20 years ago, man, that's like dropping the ego and humble and humility. And that's the best thing for a leader to be, right? So I feel very fortunate to just be able to be like, yes, I absolutely will. And I'm so glad that you're having a little bit of humility and letting your guard down, letting somebody else just take the reins for a small portion of your practice. Because again, they want to learn, they want to win games, they want to help their players get better. And if there's a better way to do that, they have to be open-minded to let that in.
Coach, you nailed it. Like I was thinking of competency or competent, right? Knowing your craft, relationships, and becoming a better communicator with what you're doing. I was wondering, like, how do we do that? What's the way? You have to have humility at first, or else you're never going to even seek out or think that there might be a better way or wonder if there is one. And be curious enough, and I think also make confident enough in yourself to be able to ask people like you, or to go on a Pure Sweat website and try to find something that pushes you. But I wrote down humility, and then you just nailed it. The games-based approach, is there a balance between when you teach a skill and it's maybe on zero, it's just against air going through that before you put them in? Or do you is there a 80-20, or is it 100%, or does it depend on also the level of player that you're dealing with?
So personally, and again, I worked for Pure Sweat for years, but my philosophy in training players is completely different. And not to take anything away from Drew, he does it the way he does things. I do things a completely different way. And so I feel it's not a beginner. I feel like there are ways to manipulate constraints and put them in problem solving. Again, it doesn't have to be, every player is different. And so you have to put them in problem solving situations, but then you have to observe and say, okay, is this too hard? Is this too easy? Is it not challenging enough? And then I can manipulate constraints. I can almost make a kid do any skill, quote unquote, that I wanted to make them do, but I don't have to teach it. I don't necessarily teach skills, but I can make a kid do a Europe step. I could put them out on the perimeter and say, hey, you have a defender neutral, and whenever you go, it's live, but I have a rim protector under the rim. And I say, hey, you're only allowed to take one step to your left, one step to your right, or one step forward. And what's the kid going to do? They're going to naturally make a Euro step. I don't have to teach. I have a girl right now that's a sixth grade girl, and she started last year as a beginner. And she's tall, she's long, she's athletic, but I've never once taught her a skill. And she can do, crazy finishes, right? Like Euro steps and, pivots where she turns away, up and unders like Luka Doncic. And she's never been taught those things. It's just, she's been put in situations where, I say, hey, look, you have to drive it at the paint and you have to get on 2 feet before you can score. Perfect. So she goes in there, she tries to find a solution. Okay, You have to drive into the paint, and you have to pivot before you can score. You have to get on. Now you have to get on 2 feet, but you have to pivot before you can score. And the defense, you're allowed to do anything you want. Out them, get back, keep your hands high. You can't jump. But again, like you can make kids find solutions that are functional. I think where we miss the boat as youth coaches is, I'll teach a player something or they'll do something and they'll say, my coach tells me that's wrong. And I say, well, you have to do what you have to do for your coach, right? Because they'll like, for instance, this girl comes in and she does the same foot, same hand layup. Well, her coach says, whoa, that's not correct. You have to go off your left foot with your right hand. And then, so now she doesn't do that. But then later on, when she gets to be 14 or 15, their high school coach is going to call me and say, hey, this girl's really good. And like, we got to teach her how to do right foot, right hand layups because she's getting to the rim any time she wants. And it's just funny. It's like, if we could go back in time and just let players their solutions and not worry about how they found the solution, as long as it's functional, right? Doesn't mean you can't give some external cues and coach. That's the biggest myth, I think, is people say, oh, small-sided game, they just don't do what they want. In the constraints-led approach, it's nudging them towards different solutions, right? If you just do games, they're going to do the same thing they always do. You're quicker than everybody, try to get to the rim every time. So like that same girl, for instance, it's like, hey, we know you're playing against lesser competition, maybe not as good as you. You can get to the rim anytime you want. Why don't we work on trying to find separation and pull up and shoot on balance? Now, do we want kids taking mid-range jump shots? No, but this is a young girl that's just learning how to play basketball. We're just trying to, like, that's the balance component. We're just working on, hey, be able to sprint into a shot, whether it's 1-2 or you hop into it and then just find balance, land in the refrigerator box or the balance box or whatever you want to, call that. But that's how you bring out skills functionally through games as opposed to just repping a technique over and over and over again, which is the way we were taught. You and I were coached that way. Like,
Yep.
I always use the example of when I was in 8th grade. I was a gym rat in 8th grade, and I could do the Mikan drill. I could make 23 in 30 seconds. But when I was this junior or senior in college, I could make 23 in 30 seconds. And so it's like, what is this? This is not this. I'm doing this in college at the Division I level. Like, we're 30 seconds, everybody's at the basket. We're doing, and the thing is, we have to stay fundamental. And it's like, well, this is not fundamental because this is not going to be a real solution. Number one, I'm not even going to shoot a layup. I don't know about you, but when I drove to the basket in college, it was to throw a lob or kick it out to somebody. It was to draw defense, but it was not to go shoot a layup at 6 foot tall. That would get pinned, to the other end. So I just never understood why we're doing these block drills that don't translate. Now if you said, hey, we're playing one-on-one and you got to try to get to the paint, and if you can score, great. And if you can't, kick it out, great drill, right? Because it's game-like. It's a game-like thing that, it's a small-sided game that we can build real functional skills, in a game, in task representative game, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
And so again, I still feel like, to answer your question, I still feel like you can, like Coach Rimmer and I had this conversation a few days ago. It's like, Coach, all your players are doing the exact same drill. And he's like, I know. Yeah. And I was like, okay, all your players are completely different. You literally have 2 girls down there that already have high major offers. They got a 9th grader and a 10th grader that potentially could be WNBA players. High major, Arkansas has already offered, like Oklahoma State, Alabama, SEC high level. And if you're doing a Mikan drill with those girls, and you're doing a Mikan drill down here with these girls need more than a Mikan drill. Our job as coaches is to try to manipulate the constraints or put them in situations where it's that right level of challenge, right? Like those 2 down there, they need to be going live one-on-one in the paint. I mean, you can do a Mikan drill, but add defense. Well, if that's too hard and they can't score, hey, tell them they add defense, but they can't put their hands up. And so you can manipulate constraints. And how you do that, because coaches always ask, is you observe and you see if it's too easy or too hard, right? All the basic fundamental drills, they're going to be way too easy. Now, for some players, that may be really hard. But again, just by adding defense and constraining the defense where they can't jump, they can't move, just having them be there. It could be a coach. It could be whoever. You're going to be able to build. Again, skills are perception and action, right? You have to see something and react to it. That's the number one thing of any sport. You have to see it and react. So if we take out what you see and react to, how do you think that's ever going to translate to a real football game? It's not. And the science tells us that. Years ago, we didn't have that science. But it's the people that study human movement, skill acquisition, skill adaptation, they're going to tell you that you have to be able to see and react. So why would you not train, see, and react? But that challenge point, I would say, is 60 to 70%. You know, in the science world, they call it the Goldilocks principle. It's not too hard, not too easy, but it's just right. So you want it to be challenging, but you don't want it to be too easy or too challenging, right? If you have a girl down here and she can't do anything against the D1 girl down here, that's deflating. That's not going to help her improve. But if you have the girl down here that's the D1 high major player, and she's like, this is so easy, they're both not getting what they need.
That's right.
We have to find the challenge point for each player on our team.
Yeah, you nailed so many good things, and I try to take a little bit of notes to go back through. And that the point you just made, though, is something I thought about for a long time. I want to train everybody in the gym as if they're our best players. I think sometimes we're guilty of, we either dumb it down for little Timmy, that every gym has a little Timmy. We dumb it down for him, or we just go too far above and only cater to maybe the one or two. I think that what I try to do is steer more towards our higher level players, but then you nailed it. What degrees can I take off? What steps can I take out for some of players to challenge them, but then still get at the creativity and have that level of challenge for my better players? I think that's kind of the art of it. It's pretty easy to say, hey, everybody micing for 20 seconds now. And for little Timmy, that may be tough, but definitely not training him like your best players. It's not making your best players better. So yeah, if you have 6 baskets in your gym, you have them grouped up. I always just ask, hey, get in competitive groups of 3 or 4. They don't know what we're going to do. We may play a small-sided game. We may not, but if they get in those kind of groups, they organize themselves, I can start to walking the gym, even just in a whisper or a quick talk. Hey, you guys are going to be doing this. Hey, let's move on. That's great. Now this. And let the other guys stay where they need to be. But so much of this is why I feel like us continuing to learn and have a growth mindset as we get older is really important. Because you're right, you and I were taught by the same people at the same era, and I was the one probably 13 or 15 years ago at McKinney High School outlawing the drop footwork on a shot, either off the dribble or off the catch. And I was a 1-2 inside footstep. Guys, listen, this is the only way we do this. And then I started watching JJ Redick, Clay Thompson, but more importantly, I started to remember of how I actually played, and I dropped way more than I ever stepped. I liked the idea that no matter where that pass comes, I can quickly move my body, drop my hips, get my feet down and go up, or off the bounce. There's a time for that. But so where did this idea come where at McKinney High School, we only do this way? I don't even know. So like the challenge for coaches is, what are the things that what are you outlawing in your gym skill-wise? And then ask yourself why. Like, what's the real reason behind that? And it's rarely black and white. I think it's more the time we got to live in the gray of the game and figure out solutions. And sometimes drop footwork is better than step. But we got to be, I think if we're not humble enough to zoom out and to listen to other people, we may be stuck in that pattern.
Thank you for checking out today's episode. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, share it with your fellow coaches, and find us on social media for what's coming up next on the JAMODI podcast. It's just a matter of doing it.